Hi everyone, I am Dr. Siddharth, and in this channel I am making videos on the basic concepts in medicine that every medical and even the paramedical students are supposed to revise every now and then in their lifetime. And I hope my videos would help you all to regain the knowledge, the concepts that you have already learned in your med school. So let's begin the video today. Today we will be discussing about the lung volumes and capacities from respiratory physiology. So in the respiratory physiology, all of you would have learned about the lung volumes and capacities, right? So what are the different types of volumes and capacities in the lung? There are two types of lung volumes and capacities. The first type is static and the second type is dynamic. So what is the difference between static and dynamic means? Static, there is no time factor involvement, but in the dynamic, on the other hand, time factor is present, which we'll be learning in detail as we go on in the video. So in today's video, we won't touch the dynamic lung volumes and capacities, but we will be dealing only with the static lung volumes and static lung capacities. So to begin with the static lung volumes and static lung capacity, we have four different types of lung volumes and four different types of static lung capacities. So let's see what are the different static lung volumes and what are the different static lung capacities. So here are the four static lung volumes as you see. The first type is tidal volume, abbreviated as TV, and the normal value written is 500 ml. Also you can mention it as 0.5 liters. Second type of static lung volume is inspiratory reserve volume, abbreviated as IRV, which is equal to 3.5 liters normally. Then the expiratory reserve volume, abbreviated as ERV, normal value being 1.2 liters or 1200 ml. The last type of static lung volume, the residual volume, abbreviated as RV, the normal value being 1.1 liters or 1100 ml. So when you check various textbooks of physiology, in Guyton you might have normal values different from the textbook of Ganong. So what book you are reading, it depends, the values may vary depending on various books that you are referring. So kindly check it. Now after static lung volumes, we go into static lung capacities. Four different static lung volumes, we have four different types of static lung capacities also. Here are the names. The first lung capacity is the static lung capacity is inspiratory capacity. Second one is functional residual capacity, vital capacity, and the total lung capacity. Here given are also the abbreviations. Inspiratory capacity can be written as IC, functional residual capacity as FRC, vital capacity as VC, and total lung capacity as TLC. Now that we have seen the names of various static lung volumes and various static lung capacities, so from this graph we'll be seeing what these volumes and capacities mean. So as you see from the graph, this graph deals only with the static volumes and static capacities of the lungs. Here they don't mention anything about the dynamic volumes or the dynamic capacities. So on your left hand side there are four static lung volumes, and on your right hand side there are four static lung capacities. The volumes are tidal volume, inspiratory reserve volume, expiratory reserve volume, and residual volume. And the various capacities are inspiratory capacity, functional residual capacity, vital capacity, and the total lung capacity. Now let's see what these volumes mean and what these capacities mean. First of all, we'll go into tidal volume. So what is this tidal volume? See, as we are sitting still, we are taking respiration, right? We are breathing in air and we are exhaling out some air from the lungs. So that is the tidal volume, the amount of air that we take into the lungs or the amount of air we exhale out from the lungs during quiet breathing without forceful inspiration or expiration. That is called the tidal volume, and the normal value is around 500 ml or 0.5 liters. Now, what is this inspiratory reserve volume? Inspiratory reserve volume is nothing but, first of all, when we have discussed about the tidal volume, what we are saying? We are saying we are inhaling 500 ml of air into the lungs without any effort. But with effort, we can inhale the extra amount of air above that of this 500 ml of air into the lungs. That is the inspiratory reserve volume, that usually amounts to 3500 ml, which means during quiet breathing we are inhaling 500 ml of air into the lungs, but with forceful inspiration we can take extra amount of 3500 ml into the lungs, which is the inspiratory reserve volume. Now, what is this expiratory reserve volume? It's nothing but, again, just the reverse of the inspiratory reserve volume. So in the tidal volume, the amount of air that either we take into the lungs or the amount of air that we can exhale from the lungs to the outside during quiet breathing, that is the tidal volume, right? So during quiet breathing we are exhaling approximately 500 ml of air from the lungs, but with forceful expiration we can exhale approximately 1200 ml of air from the lungs to the outside. So with forceful expiration, the amount of air that goes out from the lungs above that of tidal volume is the expiratory reserve volume. Now, what is this residual volume? Residual volume is the volume of air or the amount of air that is always present within the lungs even after forceful expiration. So even after expiring forcefully, the air that is coming out from the lungs, some amount of air still remain inside the lungs. That is the residual volume. Now let's see what these capacities mean. First capacity is the inspiratory capacity of the lung. So when you are inhaling air, you are inhaling 500 ml of tidal volume, and with forceful inspiration you are also inhaling 3500 ml of inspiratory reserve volume. You combine this 500 ml of inspiring tidal volume with the 3500 ml of inspiratory reserve volume, which gives you the inspiratory capacity of the lung. Or simply, if you make it a formula, inspiratory capacity is equal to inspiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume, inspiratory tidal volume. That is the inspiratory capacity. So the next capacity is the functional residual capacity. So some people might ask why they have mentioned it as functional residual capacity and why not they call it the expiratory capacity, which is the opposite of inspiratory capacity, because during expiration only the expiratory reserve volume is going out from the lungs to the environment, but residual volume is still staying inside the lungs. That is why you can't call it the expiratory capacity, but you can mention it as functional residual capacity. So functional residual capacity is a combination of expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume. Then what is this vital capacity? Vital capacity means, first you take a maximum deep inhalation. Immediately after you take the maximum deep inhalation of air into the lungs, you maximally and forcefully exhale the air out into the environment from the lungs. That is the vital capacity. First you take the maximum deep inhalation, then you forcefully exhale the entire air from the lungs. That is your vital capacity of the lung. Now what is the total lung capacity? When you add the vital capacity with the residual volume, that becomes your total lung capacity. So these are the various static lung volumes and the static lung capacities that you can see from this graph. See, so these are the formulas for various capacities. As I have mentioned from the graph, inspiratory capacity is equal to tidal volume, or the inspiratory tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume which is equal to 4000 ml or 4 liters. Functional residual capacity, which equals expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume, amounting to 2300 ml or 2.3 liters. Vital capacity, which is a combination of tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume plus expiratory reserve volume, equals to 5200 ml or 5.2 liters. And the total lung capacity equaling vital capacity with residual volume equal to 6.3 liters or 6300 ml. These are the values for the various capacities, and they might vary from book to book. So we have seen the static lung volumes and capacities today, and we have to make a very important note that all these static lung volumes and capacities, there is no involvement of time factor, which means when I'm saying tidal volume, I'm saying only tidal volume, but I'm not saying the tidal volume for 1 second or the tidal volume for 1 minute. I'm not including a time factor here. Or when I am talking about the vital capacity, I am mentioning only just as the vital capacity proper, but I am not mentioning the vital capacity in a person for 1 second or for 2 seconds or for 1 minute. So when I am not mentioning this involvement of seconds or minutes, so it means there is no involvement of time factor, and those are the static volumes and capacities of the lung. Now that we have discussed about various lung volumes and various static lung capacities, right? So we are saying normal tidal volume is 500 ml, normal inspiratory reserve volume is this much, normal vital capacity is this much. So how are we measuring these various lung volumes and capacities? Means by using an instrument called spirometer. So in the med school, usually we use the wet type of spirometer, and in the next video we will be discussing how this spirometer works. So can the spirometer measure all the four lung volumes and all the four lung capacities? The static lung volumes and capacities means no. Spirometer cannot measure the residual volume because, as we have said earlier, residual volume is always present inside the lungs. Even with forceful expiration, residual volume cannot move out from the lungs into the environment. So that is why spirometer cannot measure this residual volume. Now, why this spirometer cannot measure the functional residual capacity and total lung capacity, but why only it is measuring the inspiratory capacity and the vital capacity? Means, as you can see from the formula that I have mentioned already previously, functional residual capacity is equal to expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume, and total lung capacity is equal to vital capacity plus residual volume. When the component called residual volume is present in the functional residual capacity and the total lung capacity, that is the reason why this spirometer cannot measure these two functional residual and total lung capacities along with the residual volume. So this is a diagram that that is the spirometer, and this is a wet type of spirometer. In the next video we will be discussing how this wet type of spirometer works, and how this drum is rotating, what happens when the drum rotates, what is the arrow doing there, all this. And finally, among this four different static lung volumes and four lung capacities, functional residual capacity is very significant because it is the reason, this functional residual capacity is the reason why the lungs are kept inflated. Consider a condition when the functional residual capacity's values is brought down to zero, then that is the time when the lungs collapse. That is why the functional residual capacity is very significant, and once a collapsed lung, you cannot practically reinflate it. Thank you, and we'll be dealing with the dynamic lung volumes and capacities, and about the spirometer in the next video. What we are saying?